Hello and welcome to the third in our series of Loveland Opera Theater's vlogs. We are so excited today to be joined by three great artists who are going to be talking a little bit about the training that they go through to become opera singers. And my name is Timothy Kennedy. I'm the artistic director of Loveland Opera Theater. I'm joined by Juliana Bishop-Hoch, the executive director and founder of Loveland Opera Theater, and three fantastic singers that I'm going to take a minute to introduce to you now. We're going to start with Tessa McQueen. Tessa, we're so glad you're joining us today. Tessa is a Colorado native who is currently based in Oklahoma City, and I'm sure she's going to tell us a little bit about what it's like to be there in opera. She is a 2019 graduate of Oklahoma City University, where she received her Bachelor's of Music and Vocal Performance. Tessa continues to study voice with her undergraduate teacher, Larry Keller, and coach Dan McDaniel. She most recently sang with Opera Saratoga as an artist in residence for their Opera to Go series of Jack and the Beanstalk. The company toured over 40 schools in upstate New York with plans to tour more before the pandemic hit. In January of 2020, Tessa received an encouragement award from the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions, and she is in the midst of auditions for grad school to pursue a master's in opera performance. And again, she's happy to be working with Lot and to help shed light on what it means to be an opera singer. Tessa, thanks so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in opera.
Yeah, so my story kind of starts with Juliana for sure. When I was younger, I was always singing and just singing around the house, and I loved to sing. And my parents met Juliana through church, and she said I can start lessons when I was 12, I think. So I started right before high school singing with Juliana, and I wanted to be on Broadway and be in musical theater. And Juliana said, "Okay, that's great for right now, but I don't think that's what you're gonna do." So she was very patient and kind and helped me get into OCU, where I was surrounded by musical theater people, and I actually really wanted to be an MT myself. That's what they call it, MT. And my teacher at school also said, "Yeah, I don't think that's where you're gonna be. Give it a year and see where your heart is at the end." And I really took the full year to decide, and found that I've been performing in opera with Loveland Opera Theater for like all of my childhood, so it was kind of always there for me. And I kind of started to fall in love with it, and here we are, like 6 years later, like still very much pursuing it. So that's kind of my path.
So your very first production that you performed in was with Loveland Opera Theater. Can you tell people what that was?
Yes, it was my first thing was one of the kids in Sound of Music, I think. And then there were a couple, and then I did an angel. I was one of the angels in
Hansel and
Hansel
Gretel?
and Gretel. Okay, that might have been the first. I can't. It was a very long time ago. And then we did the Magic Flute, and I was one of I was a squirrel in the Magic Flute. I was one of Tamino's little, dee-dee-dee, and there I came. But it's kind of funny because my first ever then like real opera that I did in school, I covered the Third Lady because I thought it was a mezzo. So, but I covered the Third Lady in the Magic Flute at as a freshman. So that was a really cool kind of full circle experience.
Well, it's great to have you here, Tessa. I'm going to move on to Schyler and introduce him. Schyler Vargas will make his Opera Theater of St. Louis debut, as he joins the prestigious Gerdine Young Artist Program, as well as returning to Cincinnati Opera for their rescheduled, reimagined centennial season. Previously, he has been seen in main stage roles at the Atlanta Opera, the Lyric Opera of Kansas City, the Glimmer Glass Opera Festival, Dayton Opera, and the Château de Versailles Spectacle in France. He was set to make house debuts with the Teatro Lirico di Cagliari in Italy and the Teatro Municipal de Santiago in Chile before the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of his roles include Count Almaviva in Le Notte di Figaro, Gabriel von Eisenstein in Die Fledermaus, Maximilian and Candide, Riff, Diesel, and Chino in West Side Story, with original choreography by Jerome Robbins, and Frank Schultz in Showboat. Schyler received his Master's of Music degree from the renowned University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music under the tutelage of William McGraw, and his Bachelor of Music with a minor in Business Administration from Colorado State University. He's a proud alumnus of the Houston Grand Opera's Young Artist Vocal Academy. It's so fun to hear your bio read, isn't it?
It's almost like I wrote it.
Yeah. Schyler, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in opera.
Yeah. Okay. So I think a lot of it is pretty much the same as what I feel like many young singers are. But my story starts with my family growing up and doing community theater in Longmont together. It was kind of a way to either get our wiggles out or childcare for my mom, whatever you want to call it. My mom really made it she made it a priority to make sure that me, my two brothers, and her were involved in something artistic beyond just being in something athletic. So that was kind of my release artistically. I didn't really fall in love with it then. Like, I thought it was fun to see everybody, but I really wanted to, play football or wrestle or do something else. I even went to my undergrad as a business major, or wanting to do business first. And that's kind of the next step. So I go to undergrad, start in business. I am also studying music with Dr. John C. Schultz at first. And after the first year, I think the first opera I saw was Turn of the Screw. And I was like, I'm not into this. I don't know if
that's
anybody
a hard one to
else
start with. I don't think that's a good first opera for anybody.
Yeah. So So saw that, studied voice for a year, and I was like, I'm not sure about this. And then I had a couple lessons with Dr. Blake, and studying with her at Colorado State University, that's where I really started to discover my true voice, not something that I feel like was fabricated or trying to imitate, a pop singer or a musical theater singer that I loved, but actually discover my own voice. And I think that's when I started falling in love with opera as a genre. And so I finished my time at Colorado State University. I was like, you know what? I want to study opera seriously. I want to study singing seriously. I want to see how far music can take me. And so obviously switching from business to music, getting a Bachelor of Music at Colorado State University, and then going to the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music for opera. And that's where I studied with Bill McGraw, like you said. And that just kind of sent me on my path. So yeah, without those two schools, without those people, I don't think I would have ever been on this wild train.
Very cool. Well, we're glad to have you with us, Schyler. Let's introduce our third panelist, Phoenix Gayles. Phoenix is a soprano who has been noted for her transcendent vocal quality and warm personality. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of South Florida under the direction of Dr. Warren Jaworski and renowned soprano Stella Zambales. Miss Gayles has been seen in a variety of leading roles across the nation. Most recently, Phoenix was last seen on Loveland Opera Theatre stage performing the role of Fiordiligi in Così fan tutte, the title role in The Merry Widow, Mrs. Ford in The Merry Wives of Windsor, and Maybelle in The Pirates of Penzance. Phoenix has also recently been seen on the Boulder Opera stage in the roles of Donna Elvira in Don Giovanni, Micaela in Carmen, and Mimi in La Boheme. In the summer of 2019, she debuted a brand new opera that premiered in Gunnison, Colorado, named Lottie Silks in the role of Adele, and also co-created a brand new summer music camp for young adults with Maestro Music Institute. Outside of Colorado, Phoenix performed Nella in Johnny's Kiki with Opera Project Columbus and was praised very highly for her performance of Micaela with the Cheryl Milnes voice experience in their production of Carmen. She has also been seen on the stages of companies like Opera Tampa, St. Petersburg Opera, and New Century Opera. Since moving to Colorado, Phoenix has become a touring artist for Central City Opera, a concert soloist for Colorado Springs Philharmonic and Arapahoe Philharmonic, and has a very prominent voice and piano studio, both privately, with the Solo Hub Music. Phoenix, welcome. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in opera.
Oh goodness, what a story. I think, my music story starts at birth, really. My mom and I have a running joke of that the doctor said that I came out singing rather than screaming like most babies. So I kind of I had a knack for it. I think that there's a video in the archives that I hope nobody ever sees. Is me singing the Little Mermaid song as a 4-year-old. And then from there, it went on to being a 5-year-old at a flea market and getting up in front of a bunch of Elvis impersonators and doing Hopelessly Devoted to You from Greece. And really, I think from then it was just, I was hooked on music from then on. And I think from a very, very young age, probably from 4 or 5, I knew that music was going to be a big part of my life. And I knew that it was going to involve my own instrument. It was going to involve my voice, and it was going to, that was the thing that I always wanted to do. And I never wanted to lose it. So from there, elementary school, middle school, high school, I was in all of the choirs that I can think of. I had the best senior year of high school I think anybody could have in a music degree, where you have 4 music classes, plus you have a teacher's aide assistantship, being part of helping younger students get there, and I was only in high school. And then I think when I found opera, it was my first day of college. And although I didn't have the best college experience, that first day I found the teacher that said, "Hey, you should look into this." And his name was Dr. Jaworski, and he gave me Pamina's aria from Magic Flute, and I was like, well, I love fairy tales, and I love to sing, and I love to act, and this is everything I want. And that was my first aria that I ever did, and I was hooked ever since. And then from there, it just kind of grew and grew and grew for me, and it's kind of a dream that I've always chased, and I don't think I'll ever stop chasing it.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for being here, Phoenix.
Thank you for having me.
Juliana, would you also give us a little bit of the background of how you got involved in opera at a younger age?
Oh boy. Okay. I knew at age 5 that I wanted to sing. And I think the reason is because I saw The Sound of Music with Julie Andrews, and I wanted to be just like her. And so my dad bought me a piano and started me in piano lessons, and I enjoyed that, but all I ever really wanted to do was sing. So when I got to middle school, I started taking voice lessons, and I continued piano and voice lessons through high school. And then I went off to California to the University of the Pacific to major in music therapy. And I quickly realized that I didn't want my future to be in that, but I wanted it rather to be in performance. And so I got my first role, which was Pity Sing in the Mikado. And then I got, as a sophomore, Fiordiligi and Così, and I didn't have any technique at that point. It's just a miracle that I got through that role. It was not easy. So then my teacher said, if you want to have a career, you really better get to the East Coast. And so I went to Eastman School of Music in Rochester, did very little opera there. I was in the chorus of a number of things, and I did a few scenes, but there weren't that many opportunities for undergraduates to do roles. So then I went to Manhattan School for my master's, because I was a teacher I wanted to study with there. And I didn't do many roles in my master's degree either. They brought in artists from New York City Opera and from the Met, and they got all the roles at Manhattan School. So I said, oh, to heck with this. And I went out into the community, and I started connecting with people like Joan Dornaman at the Met her auditioning classes. I did those every Monday night, and I took acting classes and started doing a lot of auditions. And then things connected, and I started singing around the country, and I was based out of Manhattan. So that was the first chapter of my singing career.
Awesome. Great. So Tessa and Schyler both mentioned a little bit about kind of the journey of finding your voice. And there's a number of parts of that. One of them is just figuring out what your voice is as opposed to what other voices are out there. But also some of it for a lot of people is figuring out whether you're a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and how you kind of fit in the what we call the Fach, the system of figuring out what repertoire sits best in your voice, which is a different journey for everyone. So Tessa, tell us a little about, you said that you thought you were a mezzo when you kind of got started. So tell us a little bit more about that journey, and then how I would love for the others to jump in about that experience. And because it's probably one of the more, for some people can be quite a bumpy road trying to figure out your voice, right?
Yeah, so I guess when I was younger, everything kind of felt better lower for me. I think most girls feel that way. Your head voice isn't quite established or whatever. And so Juliana we sang through, alto things, mezzo things, when I was younger in high school. And going into I think it was my senior year of high school, I did a NYU summer program, like summer camp with NYU Steinhardt. And I had the teacher there. She introduced me more to like the concept of my head voice and stuff. I thought, wow, this is so amazing. Like I can sing so high. And so after that, I didn't want to be a soprano is kind of the thing. So I went to college, which is silly because the sopranos obviously get all the roles, they don't have to be the boys. And so my teacher was like, in school, my teacher said, do you want to be a boy forever or do you want to be me? And I said, well, I want to be me. So that was, part of all of that. But I think I always wanted to.
Just clarification for our audience, a lot of sopranos play what we call pants roles.
Pants roles.
Boys, the character is a male role, but usually a younger male, and it's represented by being played by a female. And so that's what you're talking about. And then there's nothing wrong with pants roles. Those mezzos do it well. They're great.
Yes. And, I think I always wanted to be Carmen. Like, that was something I always wanted to do because she's so fierce. And so I wanted to be a mezzo to play Carmen.
Carmen, so
yeah.
Might have a chance.
Right. But yeah, so I kind of started transitioning into higher rep when I was I'd say beginning of my sophomore year in college. And then by the end of my, senior year, I was playing all soprano roles. It's definitely a process. And like they always say, like almost everyone always says, it is a learning journey that never ends. You never stop learning, right? Like it's all about the journey, not the destination. Juliana used to always say that to me. But I do believe that. Like, this is, every ounce of learning and struggle or triumph with your voice is just never ending.
Schyler, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to find your voice and kind of set that apart from maybe trying to sound like another opera singer that you really admire?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start this by talking about my experience in choir and when I was younger before really seriously training. There's this weird badge of honor in choir for being able to, transform into different voice parts, being able to sing bass 2 to tenor 1. And that's something that I did in high school. But I always felt the most comfortable singing bass 2. Obviously, everyone's voice will change at different times, but I think mine changed to the point where I was able to, sit and hit those lower notes that a lot of high school men can't really. But also, belting up. And there's like this misconception that the higher you can sing, the better you are, which obviously there is kind of some truth in that, but I was able to belt pretty high. And so when I started training classically, I remember Dr. C. Schultz asking, so are you a tenor or are you a baritone? And I'm like, I don't know. And so I think that was something that has always stuck with me constantly. Even the more I study, I get people that tell me, I think you're a tenor. Your voice sits a little higher, so I think you're a tenor. And I'm like, but I can't do that all the time. Like, it won't work. I can only do it sometimes. It's more comfortable singing this way. Some of that might be influence from like growing up and listening to Frank Sinatra and Michael Bublé because I loved them, and so like I think that's where in my younger years imitation played a huge role in how I sang. I wanted to sing like them, and so I did. And so when my voice changed, I was like, yeah, I can croon like Frank Sinatra. Like I love jazz, and then I get to college, and I'm like, no, their voices sit a little lower than mine. But I mean, yeah, it's a constant battle to get outside feedback and get people telling you what you are just based off of hearing you, rather than you singing, you experiencing what you are singing, and having a really trusted authority figure telling you that sounds good or that sounds hard or that was that sounded easy to you. Was it easy? And that's where a voice teacher is so important, especially one that you trust, because they're really the ones that are kind of making sure you keep on track with being true to yourself. And I think that goes along with the statement that Tessa made about the journey, where if you ever get hard-headed about what you are and what you can do, that's where growth stops. That's where you get stuck in whatever position you're in. And so like if I got so hard-headed and was like, all these people telling me tenor rep is more for me, or all these people telling me that I'm not a tenor, I'm a baritone, I just can't sing really high, I won't change. Like nothing will change as long as I keep studying, as long as I'm open to this feedback, but reconnecting with myself and figuring out what I'm comfortable with, then that's it. And so that's why I, for now, am a baritone until, something magical happens.
Phoenix, one of the greatest descriptions I've ever heard about voice lessons, which is definitely one of the places that we explore what our voice is and trying to figure that out, is from Renee Fleming's autobiography that she wrote about 8 or 10 years ago, where she says that learning to sing in voice lessons is like standing on the banks of France and looking across to England. And if you know anything about that geography, that channel between England and France is known as one of the foggiest bodies of water, right? And then she says, and then learning to sing is basically just traversing a foggy body of water for a number of years, and then finally at some point you get to the other side and there's light again. And it's one of the saddest and most perfect descriptions of learning to sing in voice lessons I've ever heard. Talk a little bit about your experience and how voice lessons kind of really played into your training.
I had very limited voice lessons before college, and then when I got to college, I had a ton, and I learned a lot about my own voice. I kind of always knew that I was a soprano. I've always sung high. I've always, I'm the one to hit the C at the end, even if you don't want it. But I think, honestly, my understanding of the other voice types came from my own teaching. And when I started teaching, very young kids up into their teens and up into adults and things like that as I got later on. But I started to notice different things about different voices and what they do and how they do it. And I got very physical with it. And I started to do a bunch of research about, okay, what muscles are working? When are they working? Things like that. And I think the biggest testament of that is that I had a student who was a male who was going through his voice change for the first time as a teenager. And I was like, well, I don't really know what to do with this. I've never encountered this. But I kind of did research on my own end, and I found different things, and we tried different things together, and it really is, like everybody said, it's a journey to find that it through this whole thing that happens to you as a human. Through that, it was so magical to kind of be a part of that whole process for him. And he went from being a boy soprano to being a baritone, like in a matter of months. And I know it was super exciting to be a part of that. And I think that that's where I've learned the most about the voice. Because I've kind of always known where my voice sits, and that's very personal. But to understand other voices and to understand, the difference between boys and girls and alto and baritone and all of this stuff, it came from teaching, honestly, for me.
And I've heard that from a lot of singers. I mean, there are some singers who say, I'm just not a teacher. It's not something I have a passion for. But the people who really are good teachers that are also singers, every one of them I talk to, all say, I learned as much from being a teacher as I did from all the training that I did as a singer myself.
No, I would agree with that completely. I would say that, I'm one of those people that like Juliana, I want to be a performer, and I will be a performer first, always. But like Tessa says, it's a never ending learning journey. And I will never stop learning. And I think that teaching is the way that I've constantly done that. Is every student that I get is a new voice to learn about. And it's so beautiful to make that music with that person and then make this music with that other person. So it's really exciting.
Awesome. Schyler, one of the other parts of our training in addition to voice lessons is pedagogy, which some people may not really understand what that means. Will you talk a little bit about how we learn about pedagogy in our training?
Yeah, so that's something that the music field likes to insert. It's really, pedagogy is the science of teaching. And so voice pedagogy is something that I first experienced when I was in my senior year in my undergrad at Colorado State University. John C. Schultz taught a pedagogy class. And that was my first experience on what the voice is, how it functions, what the voice looks like inside our body, and how to practically help somebody make sense of all of that to create something that's really beautiful. And that's something that I continued in my master's program at CCM, Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati. And that's where it all kind of meshed together. And I started understanding what my my perception and what my ideologies of what works for students. And obviously Phoenix will understand this, Juliana will understand this, anybody who's taught anybody understands this. Every single voice is different, and it's such a small muscle, and every tiny detail in your skull creates your own unique color. And to try to navigate that as a listener as well as a singer is just so complicated. There's still so many mysteries about the voice, solely because it's so difficult to access without manipulating any of those orifices in a negative way. So like the only way they could see my voice while I'm singing is to stick a camera up my nose and down my soft palate. And obviously any singer will know that's going to inhibit something. So yeah, I guess the point of the question is pedagogy is figuring out how to teach and what techniques you are going to use to allow somebody else who's under your instruction to progress the best way they can. I think I'll say one more thing. Singing is so much like athletics or like training in literally anything. It is a muscle, And if you think about training your body, yeah, you can go to the gym and make progress. But if you have a good trainer telling you the proper ways to do lifts, not only will you progress much faster, you will reduce the chance of injuring yourself. And that is something that a lot of singers run into when we finish a certain program or don't have enough money and stop paying for voice lessons, and you try to perform all the time and you develop bad habits, and all of a sudden you're like, it's not working, I don't know what's going on. And that's what pedagogy does, and that's why it's so important for everybody to understand, regardless of if you become a teacher or not.
So I know we could talk about what it's like to learn to sing for, another 2 hours probably, and still at least keep ourselves interested. I don't know if our audience would still be, but but I want to move on and talk about some of the other topics. Not that the singing part will always be part of kind of the other things we talk about. But Tessa, you just finished your bachelor's degree. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that you had to learn about in addition to how to sing, which is, of course, one of the most important parts of the training that you do. But one of the major things that you have to spend some time in is acting and movement and dance and all of these things that become an important part. If you want to be a performer on stage, you can't just put out good sounds. You also have to do something with it and say something with the music that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and training in those areas of performance?
Yeah, sure. So, going to school as a VP of voice performance major, I was required to take, I think, 2 semesters of acting, and then 1 semester of dance. So it wasn't a ton. I added in a lot of that myself. So I just made up my own kind of degree platform because I knew that I needed more acting, because I think we could probably all agree that that is a misconception in opera, that a lot of it is that no one acts, which sometimes is true. But for the most part, like, I think, opera is one of the most intense, passionate, like, stories that you can possibly tell, with, like, an Olympian style of singing. I mean, it's just like the craziest thing to possibly do, stand up and sing without a mic over like 100-piece orchestra, so I think that was really important for me too, was that I had the acting involved in that. So I took acting in musical theater, I took screen acting, I took actings 1 through 4, and I took Shakespeare as well at OCU, which actually was really, really helpful, especially because there are some operas with Shakespeare, with Shakespeare involved. I think so many people underestimate or just don't know how difficult music school is. It is like crazy difficult to go to music school. So if you know people in it, send them like $10 to get a milkshake or something because, it's because on top of all of your other studying, you're learning roles for operas or musicals or whatever show you're doing outside of school that is not a credit, so you're doing rehearsals from like 7 to 10 p.m. every night, like going home, staying up all night to write a paper for the end of the term, right? Like it was very intense for my bachelor's degree. Obviously I wouldn't change it because I really enjoyed it and learned a lot, but yeah, that's kind of part of all of that, and acting and dance, and there are a lot of moving parts to being a performer. So
Tessa, you were able to do the role of Susanna while you were there at college, right? And you sang one of the arias from that opera for us for a recital this summer, or actually it was in October, I think.
Yeah, fall, November.
The fall, that's right. For our thanks recital. And those recitals, by the way, are still available on YouTube, and anybody can go and watch them along with our other vlogs. But I'm going to play an excerpt from Ain't It a Pretty Night. Would you talk just a little bit about that aria? I'm playing the middle of it, just so you know.
Yeah, sure. So, Ain't It a Pretty Night comes at the very beginning of Susanna. This is like her first aria that we see her in. And this is like the happiest moment of the whole show. The show then turns very sour and dark, as Phoenix knows as well. She sings this aria too. And so the show is like I think one of my favorites. Like, it's a beautiful tragedy. And it kind of shows what we as humans can do to other people when we don't know the full truth and when we don't ask. But Ain't It a Pretty Night is like the most beautifully written English aria, I think, in existence. I mean, and just the wording that he uses to explain, he talks about the stars and the sky as like velvet, like who comes up with that? Like, it's just beautiful. It's like such poetry. And even the music, like, it's slightly like, you're like, ooh, it's kind of crunchy is what like a little crunchy sometimes. And you're like, it's such a good, deep aria, and it's really truly showing her love for nature and where she is, and I think the beauty of being a human. So yeah.
Well, I think you've set it up beautifully, and everybody wants to hear it now. So let's take a listen.
Great.
I aim to leave this valley someday and find out for myself, to see all the tall buildings and all them street lights, and to be one of them folks myself. I wonder if I'd get lonesome for the valley though, for the sound of crickets and the smell of pine straw, for soft little rabbits and golden things, and the mountains turning golden awful. But I could always come back if I got homesick for the valley. So I'll leave it someday and see for myself. Someday I'll leave, and then I'll come back when I'll see what's beyond them mountains.
Awesome. Well, I know that that's not the whole aria, and people probably want to hear the whole aria, and they can go back and hear that in your November recital from 2020. So hopefully they'll go back and hear the whole thing. Yeah, that aria is one of my favorites, and it just really shows what's required of a great singer. Is just so many things. Yeah. Schyler, one of the other things that is a major part of training is that we know that opera did not develop in America originally. It started in Europe. And so because of that, there are the majority of the kind of regular operas that get produced are in foreign languages, Italian, French, German, and then of course now we're beginning to see Spanish operas, Czech operas, Russian operas. So there's lots of language involved. Talk a little bit about some of the training that is involved in learning to sing in different languages.
Yeah, so like you said, most opera that we know today is in a different language other than English. Obviously, a lot of these languages, there's old opera that was composed and written a long time ago, a lot longer than we think. And so I think we're seeing a resurgence of a lot of these because people are we're ready for new stories. But anyway, yeah, so as far as learning language, one of the biggest challenges that opera singers face is not only learning the basics of each language. Obviously, that's something that we have to do, is take beginner to intermediate or whatever level you go on to learn. of each language. French, Italian, German are the major ones, and then we even have to study our own language, believe it or not. We also have to learn how to say the words as if we were fluent, even if we're not. And so that's one thing that we have to do quite seriously, and that's called diction. And so we have to take language diction in each of those languages. So yeah, that's really something that we have to seriously study in our degree programs, because most of the music, the honesty in the vocal line and the musicality is based in the language. And so especially that's true for Mozart operas. All of us have done it, all of us have practiced, but recitative in Italian is if you don't know how to correctly say these words, you will not sound very good when singing his operas. So yeah, I feel like it's kind of one of the main reasons that that getting various degrees in opera is something that even exists in the first place, because it is so challenging to not only study all these languages, but study them pretty much at the same time, and usually at the same time as performing a recital or rehearsing with choir or for an opera or for whatever you want to do. So yeah, it's complicated.
Milkshakes for all.
$10 milkshakes,
Yeah.
big boys.
And a lot of coffee too to study it on top of it.
Yeah.
So what would you say was the most challenging language that you had to learn diction wise?
Right off the bat, French and Russian. French, because it seems like there's just so much extra information in the words themselves. Even having a very strong Spanish background like I had, many of the words look similar, but they don't sound anything like it. And so I think that was the most intimidating in my undergrad. And then, I mean, obviously, I didn't even touch Russian or Czech until getting to my master's program. But yeah, that French and Russian were definitely the most intimidating and difficult languages to study.
Speaking of quick French, you sang for us also a recital. You and Phoenix did a duet recital for us for our recital series, and you sang the Chanson à boire by Ravel for that recital, which has some pretty quick French in it as well. Talk a little bit about learning the French of that, and then we're going to take a listen to it.
Yeah, so that was the Don Quixote du Cygne was the first French song cycle that I studied in my master's program with Bill McGraw. It's one of the classic baritone song cycles. Every baritone is recommended to sing this, and I feel like every baritone does. And even though it could get overplayed sometimes, it never is dull. I think it is such a great song cycle. But essentially, it's about Don Quixote. This is Ravel's rendition of the story, and
Most people might know that as Don Quixote.
Yeah, right. And so in the piece that I sang for the recital, I chose it because obviously Don Quixote, he experiences life in a different way than everybody else, and he's kind of telling everybody to back off, get off his vibe, let me drink to joy, because all I want to do is be happy.
My favorite is the face at the end. Ah, there's the hat.
Yeah, I will say that was before, that was in the midst of the pandemic. So none of us, at least I, did not already make the investment in proper microphone or had no idea what I was doing on GarageBand. So, but yeah, had to make it fun.
That's all right. We were grateful to have art during the period, so we're grateful to have that performance, and it still sounds beautiful even with maybe not the greatest microphone. Phoenix, I want to talk a little bit about, two of the things, when we're in middle school and high school, when some of us have to take science or math and we're like, when are we ever going to use this, right? And there's a couple of those kinds of classes sometimes in music training as well. Some people call them music theory and music history. And a lot of times, you're sitting in the middle of it and you're learning about, the form of a rondo and all that sort of thing. And you're like, when am I ever going to use this as a singer? But at the same time, one of the things that we learn as professionals is having some sense of the history when this music was written, the what influenced the composers, what was going on politically and in the other art forms around the time, as well as how we analyze the piece to find the crunchy parts in Susanna, or as Tessa called them, or to understand kind of the form of music and how it comes to be. Talk a little bit about how those classes and kind of your understanding has helped to develop how you look at opera and the shows, how you sing Mozart differently from a Nikolai or from Strauss.
I have always found it very fascinating on the different styles of music, and through the genres, going back to not only the classics but blues, jazz, funk music. Funk music was the thing that I really got into in college, and there's this whole world of keys and changes that you can use to create a new form of music, and there's this running joke of like, the younger generation will always pick the thing that your parents don't like, but at the same time, later on, I love the music my parents listened to, because now I find the beauty in it. Now I find the things that made it what it is by learning what those things came from.
One of the areas that kind of allowed for development of opera moving to musical theater was kind of the operettas of the late 1800s, early 1900s, and you happened to do one of those pieces with us, the Merry Widow, and in the Merry Widow, Strauss definitely. You can see the start of the movement towards more, utilization of popular forms, but also, the waltz, which is still a very old form, but very much becomes a very important part of the operettas of that time period. Talk to me a little bit about how you utilized your training in music theory, music history to kind of understand what was going on musically in the role of Hannah Glavari.
This is going to sound convoluted for me, but the music got easier and harder at the same time, because you got less orchestration, but you got more ensemble on top of that. And putting all of that stuff together was totally different than what you got earlier, where you got heavy orchestration and then big solo and ensemble that was big, and this was all condensed into a very small little ball, and it was the same idea, but at the same time, in a very short amount of time, which kind of brought you into that world a little bit, where you had to do this grandeur thing, but it wasn't considered grand at the time. As far as, for those listening at home, when we talk about grand opera, it wasn't the big Puccini stuff. It wasn't Turandot. It wasn't this big orchestration, these big casts. It wasn't that. It was everything that was that compacted into a very small thing. And being Hannah really was kind of trying to, as far as the character goes, wrapping your mind around a very big, complex character in a very small space. And in just the music world. It has nothing to do with the space that we were working in or anything like that.
Which also was a small space.
Helped. But it was a very grand character that was now compressed into a very, I call it a little grand character. That all of the same elements were kind of there, but then there were things that were missing that didn't fill it out, but did at the same time, which is why I said it was convoluted at the start.
Well, the whole plot is convoluted also, so it matches the plot. So your entrance into that opera, Hanna Glavari's entrance, is immediately announced by all of the men who run into the room to say that she's coming in. And then I'm sure that your operatic training in college prepared you for being having 40 men throw themselves at you on stage, right?
Every single day.
I have not been in Paris long. Their customs still unknown. The greetings of the men are strong and very forward too. Upon my patrons still high, which causes my distrust. To prudence I should say goodbye, and to their ways adjust. The men are kind and full of praise, but I question their aim. I wonder if it's me or the men I have. Am I way off base? I've heard widows kiss on the side, but with the
The men were very dedicated at fighting over you.
I miss it for sure.
Such a great scene. Well, speaking of crossover, Schyler, you have fairly recently done some productions that were done by opera companies, but definitely were crossover. You did Showboat in a great production that's been done in a number of companies, that's moved around to different companies. And then also you did a number of productions of West Side Story, one at your college and then a couple at other places. The idea of opera singers doing Jerome Robbins choreography even 50 years ago was probably not even, a concept that was possible. But now we know for especially you young singers that are still doing your training that is going to be a real reality, is being able to be that diverse in your training and abilities, and being willing to jump in and say, sure, I'll do Jerome Robbins choreography. So talk a little bit about what it requires to kind of be able to do that crossover.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, it was such a privilege to be able to do that. Doing all of those productions of West Side Story not only informed me of what it takes to perform that, and just the art that is dance, that I very much underappreciated before, but it also opened up a whole new world for me as a performer. I'm not saying everybody needs to go out and start training seriously in ballet and jazz and whatever else. I even took a year of tap to prepare for Showboat, which was so hard, but so fun. But it definitely opens up doors. And I think that's what I saw in performing West Side Story for the first time at Glimmerglass Festival. I was lucky. I have no dance training prior to forcing myself to learn this stuff in upstate New York at the Glimmerglass Festival, but I at least got a month to do it. Usually musical theater dancers or musical theater performers who are strong dancers and want to be a part of some ensemble, or at least a very great leading role that requires strong dance skills. They do that like half the time. Like I had a whole month and a half plus the days performing to like try to figure it out, and that's something I it's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I was super grateful for it, and the fact that I was able to at least fake it until I make it. My way into that show, I was asked to do some other productions at different companies because I already knew the choreography, and it's just like libretto. It's just like music, where once a show is choreographed by a choreographer and that's how they want it, it's trademarked the same way. And unless you want to do a different version of the show, it's going to be that choreography. So there's just a world of people who know all of the Jerome Robbins original choreography and just go from production to production, and it turns into their full-time job. And so I think opera is, sorry, this is probably a different completely different question, but opera is moving into that realm where we want new shows, and we want smaller shows, or we want more well-rounded storytelling. And that requires something physical. It requires better acting. It requires stronger singing. And it's just going to keep getting harder and harder, I think, just like the Olympics, where people just keep getting more inhuman or like superhuman every day. And that's what we seek, and that's what we want.
So we're getting pretty close to our time. I just have one more question for each of you. Tessa, you talked about at the very beginning that you started out thinking you wanted to do musical theater, and now you do opera, but now we have this idea of crossover. So, my question for you is, you had teachers tell you that your voice fit better for opera, but do you believe you can also do some of this crossover? And do you think that you learned something from going back and forth between the two worlds of opera and musical theater?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think, my school, obviously being from OCU, we have Kristen Chenoweth and Kelly O'Hara, who Kelly O'Hara has done stuff at the Met. She was in Cozy just 3 years ago. Yep. And so, obviously I think as a woman in the industry, it's a little bit different for us to cross over. I think Schyler has maybe a little bit of an easier time maybe transitioning in between, just because
to do with the voice type, right?
Exactly, yeah. The male voice, like you said in Showboat, like he can go and sing this huge voice, but as in the Broadway right now, it's kind of for females, it's like either you're a belter or you're old classical kind of MT stuff. So I think, definitely, like, I would definitely follow, like, Kelly O'Hara's career path, I think, and do, like, shows like The King and I and Carousel and, do that kind of thing. And I'm totally open to doing that because I love musical theater just as much as I love opera. It's the same art form, just different paths, right? So yeah, I definitely think that there is room for that, and I think that would come at a later point in my life. Kelly O'Hara is obviously very established, and so is Renee Fleming, to be able to cross over. Being a soprano, I mean, God, there are so many of us. Being a woman in this career, like, there are so many of us, and so many of us that are so good. Like, it is like there are just, yeah, there is just an abundance of great female singers and actors and dancers who could do, 8 million things at once and juggle. Like, it's like, so and yet that person, sorry.
Are you being pegged as, she does musical theater? Is that what the fear is?
I think it's less of a fear of that, as like, it's really hard to break into that. You have to be in the circuit in New York, auditioning at 4, going to stand in line at 4 a.m. Like, unless you have an agent, right, that might set you up. Like, that's kind of, I think, that would be where that kind of comes together, is if your agent is like connected to the operatic and the musical world, and they're like, oh, hey, we're reviving Carousel like they did, 3-4 years ago. Do you have any opera singers who would like to come in and sing for, Carrie or, whoever?
Phoenix, my last question for you is what do you think is the most misunderstood or just not misconception of what opera singers have to do in their training, whether it's the amount of training, whether it's the variety? What do you think is the largest misconception of what opera singers do to train to be there in their field?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the college that you go to. And it depends on the institutes that you go to and the emerging artist programs that you get into and things like that. I had a very different experience. And I don't want it to discourage anybody. If you don't get into a good school, I didn't. I took my first bet because one of my friends went to that school and it was close to home, and I was scared because I came from a very small town and a very small family, and I didn't want to leave. And I was very lucky to find the 2 people in my entire school that led me to my path. However, the school in general that I went to totally put rocks on me and pushed me down a lot. And so for me, it was, I did all of that stuff on my own. It was my own determinedness to make this part of me. I always knew I wanted to sing. I always knew I wanted singing to be a part of my career. And I wasn't going to let something like the school that I went to deter me from that pathway. And so honestly, by the time I became a sophomore in my undergrad degree, I had already made a network. I had created my own contacts. I had gotten myself jobs, and I did it myself. And I guess what I would say is don't knock that, because you're so much more capable than you think you are. And yeah, you could go to the best schools in the country, and it's not to knock you guys from going anywhere else and having great experiences. But if you don't have that, it's okay. It's okay. And you can still make a super great career. And that's what I did. I made my own path. And I would say that is the biggest advice that I can give.
I think that's great advice. I mean, I think all of us in this business have learned that there is no one path, and you have to create your path, and you have to, the passion is important because it's not always an easy path, but in the end, you can talk to 50 people and nobody did it the same way. So I think that's great advice. Schuyler.
Also, one more thing is don't be afraid of the word no, because it's going to happen a lot.
Yep.
No, it's going to happen a lot. Just don't be afraid of it. Just keep going.
I think it's great advice. I think all of you have given great advice. I hope there's some young singers that are listening today because they'll learn a lot from you all. I think it's great you're all in different places of your training to show that everybody does it differently and that we all have to find our path. We're really wonderfully happy that you're all a part of the Loveland Opera family, because we're so proud of the work that each of you do and the musicality and the professionalism that you bring to everything you do. So thank you so much for your time. Hopefully those that are just wanting to learn more about opera have learned about all the crazy stuff that we all go through to be in this business, and appreciate a little bit more next time they see you on stage or in a video, all of the work that you had to do to get where you are. We're really excited to see where you all go next, and we're really grateful for your time and for your knowledge today. So thank you very, very much. Before we go, I have to do just a quick commercial. Loveland Opera Theater is a nonprofit arts organization, and of course, in this time of COVID, we are trying to just continue to keep going. And so we hope you will take a moment to give a donation to allow us to continue to keep working with young artists like these wonderful performers and the many other singers and musicians that we get to work with. Juliana, I'll give you the last word on operatic training and the crazy field that it is.
It's very important to be prepared. So learn how to do that. However you need to do it, just make sure that you're prepared, because you get one chance to make a first impression. So training is critical, and getting out there, being in the industry, doing things in the industry is very important for your careers. Awesome. Thank you all. We love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next month for another one of Loveland Opera Theater's vlogs, and we'll be glad to see all of you our stage again soon.